counted down.
Okay, maybe there's just a delay. I'm
No,
not seeing anything.
it's working. Look, there we go. Okay. All right. Yeah, I see. I think I'm live now. You should get me in a few seconds.
Yeah, now my little red button is on. Yeah, okay. Yeah, oh, fantastic. Okay, Kenny. Yeah, you're there. You didn't mess up the computer, the screen.
Good.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I'll just plan to get going at 2 o'clock.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, basically, you don't have to do anything, right? Okay, so you're live right now, so whoever has joined us, they can hear our conversation.
Yep.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And that's okay. That's okay. But I'm gonna go ahead and hang up the phone
Okay.
and thank you so much for doing this. Did
Yep.
you get my blurb about Pisgah Legal?
I did. Yep.
Okay. Wow, we've already got 12 people on the call.
Am I able to tell if people are on or just you?
No, people are on. There's 15 people on right now. So if you want to, you can just go ahead and just start introducing yourself and just talking about your experience at Roberts and Stevens.
Okay. All right. I will in just a second. I'm going to wait till 2, Jody.
Okay. All right. I'm going to hang up.
Thanks. Okay. I'm not sure who is out there and who is watching, but it is 2 o'clock, and so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kenny Hunt. I'm a lawyer here in Asheville at the law firm of Roberts and Stevens. I've been here about 20 years. My areas of practice are civil litigation, including landlord-tenant law and construction litigation. Those are my two primary areas. Do a lot of landlord tenant, and so many times in the cases I handle, I may run into a lawyer from Pisgah Legal on the other side, and through the years have had a good working relationship with Pisgah Legal, and so they've asked me because they were getting a lot of calls during this pandemic. They were getting a lot of calls from landlords asking questions, and Pisgah, is going to generally be representing tenants or all the time representing a tenant, but they want to be a resource for landlords in these trying times. So they've asked me to do this presentation on and hopefully be a help and assistance to landlords during this COVID-19 outbreak. And just for those of you who don't know, if there's any tenants watching, Pisgah Legal is a legal aid organization in Western North Carolina, and they can help their clients, renters, tenants. They can help you with unemployment benefits. They are often involved in helping victims of domestic violence, and they also help people get enrolled for health insurance. And so I want to give a little plug for Pisgah Legal. And in the same breath, let you know that I do not work for Pisgah Legal. I'm a lawyer in private practice. So the topic areas that we're going to talk about today, and then I'm going to hopefully allow plenty of time for questions because I want this presentation to be helpful to you, and I know you've got questions, and so hopefully I can answer those. But the topic areas are, is your ability to evict tenants right now? What hurdles are there currently and what those hurdles are. The second topic area would be what potential relief are there for landlords who, tenants aren't paying. And then the third topic area would be resources that are available and hopefully in our community that that you could refer tenants to for help and increase the likelihood of you as a landlord getting paid rent. Um, the first topic area, and then finally I'll answer questions. And some people submitted questions in advance, and I have those. Um, the On issue one, what hurdles are there currently to being able to evict a tenant for non-payment of rent or otherwise? There is potentially a very big hurdle, and that's in the CARES Act that you've probably all heard about that Congress passed probably about 2 weeks ago. There is a federal moratorium on filing evictions if the landlord's property is financed by a federally backed loan. So, right currently, if you as the landlord have a federally backed loan on the property where the tenant lives, there is a prohibition on being able to file summary ejectment cases, and that initially, I'm pretty sure, is goes for 60 days from the middle of March. So you do have currently a federal prohibition if your loan is federally backed. So then the question is, well, is your loan a federally backed loan? I don't have the answers for each of you, and I highly recommend if you are feeling a financial pinch because of the COVID pandemic, that you talk to your lender and find out if if you have a federally backed loan. If it's a USDA loan, that's federally backed. If it's Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, that's federally backed. Any Section 8 is going to fall under this federal moratorium on eviction actions. But I think federally backed is probably a pretty broad term. So talk to your lender because number one, that's going to impact your ability as a landlord to file an eviction action for non-payment of rent. But when I get to help for landlords, whether your loan is federally backed or not is going to be important because for federally backed loans, lenders currently are under a moratorium from filing foreclosure actions. And let me specify something I don't think I did. The federal moratorium on filing eviction actions, if your loan is federally backed, only applies if you are filing for non-payment of rent. So it only applies if you are filing for non-payment of rent. If the tenant has breached some other provision of the lease, then you potentially could still file a summary ejectment action. For instance, criminal activity. You should still be able to file, and that moratorium would not apply to you because you're not trying to evict a tenant for non-payment of rent. You're evicting them for reasons that really aren't related to the COVID outbreak. So, talking about hurdles to eviction actions currently, we just discussed the federal moratorium if you have a federally backed loan. The other hurdle right now would apply to all landlords. It would apply to anybody trying to have hearings in civil court because currently the Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court has issued orders basically suspending or continuing any civil matters until June 1st and after. So currently, if I file a summary ejectment action today against a tenant, the earliest that could be heard in North Carolina would be June 1st or later. So the court system is trying to keep people socially distanced and protected. And so right now, all civil proceedings, there's some exceptions, are continued until June 1st or thereafter. So assuming you don't have a federally backed loan and you wanted to file an eviction action, you could file that currently. You can go down to the courthouse and you can file it, but you need to know it won't get heard until at the earliest June 1st or thereafter. So, as you can tell, there are some pretty significant hurdles for landlords right now if tenants won't or can't pay the rent. Um, so that all sounds very grim. Well, let me give you a little bit of good news, hopefully. Um, because we have this federal moratorium on evictions if the property is financed by a federally backed loan. Congress also gave some relief. Hopefully, that applies to landlords, which is if you're a landlord and you have the federally backed loan, you are likely going to fall under the moratorium on lenders filing foreclosure actions. So right now, if you have a federally backed loan, likely your lender could not file a foreclosure action against you. And the second piece of that is if you have a federally backed loan, you can request that your lender forbear your mortgage payments, meaning that you wouldn't have to make them in the months if you're in, if your property has been impacted directly or indirectly by this pandemic, then you should qualify for your mortgage payments to be delayed forbearance, and that differs based on the type of property. But that's definitely something. If you're feeling the squeeze because you're not getting rental income in, you should be talking to your lender about forbearing your mortgage payments. For certain properties, you can, the forbearance would go to 90 days, and for other properties, it's 120 days, and you can ask for an additional 120 days. As I sit here today, I can't tell you all the ins and outs of the forbearance program, but I know that is an option for you. But that's something that you're going to need to talk to your lender about. And I recommend, the question is, do I qualify for relief under the CARE Acts for my mortgage, and and then what do I qualify for? And then you would work out a forbearance agreement with your lender, and I'm sure they're putting together forms for to comply with the CARES Act. But be proactive about that. The same way I'm telling you to be proactive with your lenders and communicate with them. I'm going to be encouraging you and tenants to be proactive in communicating with each other, so that you have an understanding of the circumstances you are in as a landlord and the circumstances your tenants in. Potentially or highly likely they've lost a job or been laid off. Um, so we have the moratorium on filing evictions, but you have potential relief from your mortgage payments for a period of time. So that's just where we find ourselves, and then you have the issue of you can't even be heard on a summary ejectment action right now, and the earliest you could be would be in June. So the question, one question would be, well, what can we do as landlords now if we have tenants that can't or won't pay rent? Um, And that's going to be a case by case basis. You know your tenants. Hopefully that they'll communicate with you. But one thing that you can do, and there's a variety of options, is a lease addendum. One of the questions that was submitted in advance was, can I amend the lease? Can I do a lease addendum to work with the tenant on the payments that they're missing? Absolutely. Um, you know, Hopefully you already have a written lease with your tenant. You don't have to have a written lease with your tenant, but I highly recommend that you have a written lease with your tenant. If you do, then you can do, or even if you don't, if it's an oral lease, you can do a lease amendment or an addendum to your lease. Potential ideas. I'm not telling you what to do, but these are just ideas of things you could do. For instance, if the tenant had missed payments for March and April, you could take that amount and divide that amount up in missing rent payments, divided by the remaining months on the lease, and then the tenant would pay additional rent for the remaining months of the lease. Beginning when they expect to be employed again, or to get their tax refund, or to get some of the stimulus funds that are going to be coming out to individuals and families. Um, and so, yeah, you can spread the missed payments out over the remaining term of the lease. I'm not telling you to do this, but you certainly can. You're free to. You can forgive, rent months of rent if you want to do that. Um, you could, if you don't want to spread the payments out and you just want to get in on a lump sum, you do a lease addendum where you have the tenant acknowledge, I missed these payments and it totals X amount of money. And, the tenant has to pay, that amount of money, by the date you agree on. And if they don't, it's a lease violation for which you can terminate the lease and file a summary ejectment action. Um, and also, you could amend your lease to accept a lesser amount, to require a lesser amount of rent for a certain number of months, depending on your tenant's circumstances. Um, I do recommend, if you're going to do a lease amendment, I recommend it be in writing. That way, there's no misunderstandings about the expectations and the obligations of on you as the landlord and the tenant. Um, if you have a tenant that's not willing to communicate with you, not willing to work with you, if you're willing to work with them, then your options are a lot more clear. If you got a tenant that you know is not paying, isn't communicating, isn't trying to work with you, then obviously looks like you're probably going to be heading down the summary ejectment path when you can do that with if you're not subject to the federal moratorium, or you're not you can get a hearing after June 1. And tenants hopefully should understand that they need to communicate with you. They can't just ignore the situation, and hopefully they will communicate with you. On this point, a Pisgah Legal attorney by the name of Robin Merrill gave a talk similar to this, but to tenants last week. And Pisgah Legal is recommending to tenants that if you can, um, pay your rent first and worry about the other bills secondarily. I mean, there's not much more important than having a roof over your head and having food to eat. And so I think Pisgah Legal is telling folks, if at all possible, you should pay your rent, communicate with your landlord, because there are other resources in the community that hopefully are available to tenants for other things like um, groceries, and so those resources for food may be easier to access than the resources for tenant or for rental assistance. Excuse me. And so I want to talk just related to what I'm suggesting, that you communicate with your tenants, find out their situation as much as they'll let you into their world. Um, you may be a good resource to recommend resources for them. Um, and I wanted to mention some in particular. Um, for non-rental assistance, you can refer your tenants to the United Way. They have a telephone number 211, and they have a database of charitable programs where that can help fulfill a variety of needs, such as food, that your tenants may benefit from and may qualify for. So yeah, you can tell them to call 211 for issues related to rent. Pisgah Legal Services can certainly help your tenants, and um, oftentimes can help point your tenant in the right direction for rental assistance. Um, some of the agencies that I know of that help with rental assistance are Eblin, ABCCM, the Salvation Army, St. Vincent de Paul, and sometimes churches in the community can help with rental assistance. Um, so when you're communicating with your tenants, you may be a resource for them. You could also refer them to Pisgah Legal's webpage that has a variety of, or has a link to a variety of charitable organizations that may be a benefit to your tenant. Um, I think I've probably spoken long enough and gone over a lot of what I wanted to cover. And so happy to take questions now, if I can access, if there are any. So let me look. Oh, let me go first. Some people that submitted their questions ahead of time. One of them was, can you do a lease addendum with your tenant? And I think I've answered that. Absolutely, you can. I think at the conclusion of this program, Pisgah Legal and I will work together and put a form lease addendum on Pisgah's website that you can access. It won't cover, yeah, it may cover your situation, but you're welcome, to customize it. The clearer, the better. So take your time. You basically can contract for about anything in a lease. There's some things you can't do, but um, as long as both parties are on the same page, you can amend your lease the way that you and your tenant want to amend it. Um, so I'm trying to look at these questions that I got. Okay, I answered the one about amending it. Got one that says, I'm the owner of a 6-unit office building. All offices are shut down. What kind of payment alteration is available? The short answer is any way you really want to work it. Um, uh, uh, there's a few more restrictions on what you can do in a residential lease, but for commercial leases, the parties are virtually free to agree on anything they want to. So you can amend your commercial lease just about any way you want to. Um, the Another question I got is, I'm a property manager for about 15 long-term rentals, most of which have tenants living paycheck to paycheck, trying to find resources for both the tenants and the property owner so that we can hopefully find a win-win solution and honor all parties as best as possible. We're looking for assistance with the property owner's mortgage payments. Hopefully, what I mentioned in the beginning, um, about this, the loan forbearance, um, um, section of the CARES Act, answered your question. So talk to your lender, find out if that property is federally backed, if the mortgage is federally backed, you should qualify for loan forbearance and be protected, from the current foreclosure moratorium. So, and I'm not going to get into this very much. There's also in the CARES Act something called the PPE, payroll protection. If you are if you're a, you know, if you're a landlord and you have employees, you may qualify for a loan under the PPP. And if you meet certain conditions, the amount of money that you borrow could be forgiven. So that's another possibility depending on your situation. Um, and okay, so those are the questions I got in advance. Let me try to find if anybody submitted any questions. Uh, Someone I know asked, "Can you even file an eviction for future hearings?" You can file currently. You're just not going to get a hearing until after June 1st. Um, but you might as well go ahead and get in line um, if you're not under the federal moratorium. Somebody asked, so basically, tenants are not obligated to pay anything until this is all over. I wouldn't agree with that. Um, right now, there are obstacles to evicting tenants, but those obstacles will eventually be out of the way. And if you've got a tenant that hasn't been paying rent, you will be able to evict them. So there's nothing out there that's going to forgive rental payments in full. So um, yeah, if you've got a tenant that simply thinks they don't have to pay anymore, that's not correct. There's just some impediments to you as a landlord right now to evicting them, but eventually you will be able to. And tenants should, if they're mature enough, should know that if they've tried to work with a landlord, you know, hopefully is going to try to work with them. But as I said earlier, if you've got a tenant that just isn't communicating and basically just tells you I'm not paying, even if they could, or won't tell you, won't share when they might be able to pay, then the choice for the landlord becomes a little more clear. Um, I think there was a follow up question to the one I just answered. Um, Says we are on a month to month basis. Um, you could probably still pursue a summary ejectment, um, but I think if the court thought the real issue was you were filing for non-payment as opposed to just you wanted to terminate at the end of the because it's a month to month, you may hit some obstacles, but I don't think if a judge was hearing this and the tenant just paid nothing, and um, I don't think they would be very sympathetic to the court. Somebody asked, could you take rent from the deposit? Um, yes, I think the short answer is yes. Okay. Somebody said, since the end date is up in the air, we're finding that tenants won't sign anything. Is there any issue with waiting until this is over and we are able to file eviction if they won't comply? Since the end date is up in the air. Um, I'm not sure I understand the question, but um, I think I may have alluded to what my answer would be is if you have grounds to evict and you're at the end of a lease and the tenant won't sign won't sign a new lease or won't sign a lease addendum, then you can go ahead and file. And right now hearings will resume on June 1st. And so if you got a tenant that's not working with you, you might as well go ahead get in line. You're going to have to wait until July 1st at the earliest, but um, you can go ahead and file. Let's see. Here's one. Can you have your tenant apply for Section 8 vouchers to cover a gap in rent if their income is down enough that they qualify? Can you have your tenant apply for Section? The question just um, um, yeah, I am not a Section 8 specialist, but um, I would, and I'm going to be upfront. I'm guessing here. I don't see why they couldn't apply for a Section 8 voucher. Um, Although I think I know those are not easy um, to get. Um, I think there's usually a waiting list, and so if they're just now getting in line, I'm not sure. I'm not sure a Section 8 voucher will come in enough time to be helpful, but that's a guess, and I guess there's no harm in asking, no harm in trying. Um, Next question was, if ultimately you have to evict, are you able to obtain a judgment? Um, right now, you can't get a judgment. You can file, but you can't get a hearing. If you can't get a hearing until June 1st, you can't get a judgment. So right now, you really can't evict because you can't get a judgment right now because of there's no summary judgments being heard. So hopefully that answered your question. And guys, I'll say I know I'm probably the bearer of bad news, and hopefully nobody's throwing stuff at the computers with all the bad news I'm giving. Let's see. There's a question: if a tenant dies and the tenant lives alone, what can you do about their belongings? Um, I have addressed that issue for clients multiple times, and unfortunately, the answer is not on the top of my head. Um, I would try to contact a family member if an estate has been set up. Then you need to deal with that estate administrator or estate executor, and try to get them to come get the property, um, or a family member. But I'm not comfortable, and I should have given this disclaimer at the first. Um, Pisgah doesn't really want me giving legal advice. We're just talking about the current situation, a bit of a conversation. That's one I think you better talk to a lawyer about. I know I'm a lawyer, but I don't have that answer right in front of me right now, and so I recommend you talk to a lawyer. But what I can say is if the estate has an executor or administrator, that's who you need to deal with. Um, Somebody echoed something I said, that Section 8 usually has a 1+ year wait list. That's consistent with my understanding. A lot of you commented on Section 8. Um, I said there was no harm in trying, but it doesn't sound like that's going to be a great option. Um, um, there was a follow-up question about somebody that Miss Evans, who asked, "Can you get a judgment right now?" Asked, after we're legally able to have a hearing and an eviction is granted, can can you then file for payment of back rent, and if they don't pay, obtain a judgment? Yes, the rent is not forgiven um, by anything, by this pandemic, by anything Congress has done. There's nothing that says that the rent is not due or that it's forgiven. There are some obstacles to filing right now, and there's, as I mentioned, the federal moratorium on filing for eviction in this window if you have a federally backed loan. But Ms. Evans, you can get a monetary judgment against your tenant for rent that they didn't pay when the courts open back up. Yeah, so there's nothing that I know about that says the rent's not due. The rent is still due. There's just some practical difficulties, so that I think landlords have to be more creative and flexible in working with their tenants. Um, the next question is, if we're allowed to apply security deposits for rents with an addendum, can we take it from the account now or have to wait until the person moves? Um, no, I think you can agree that the security deposit can be used now um, to satisfy the rent obligations. Um, I, certainly, if the tenant agrees, absolutely you can do that. And even if the tenant doesn't agree, you're going to be eventually, if they missed rent, you're going to, by statute, be able to use a security deposit to make up for missed rental payments. So the answer is to your question is yes. Guys, it looks like we've been at this for about 37 minutes. I don't see any more questions. I apologize if I missed something. But I'll just repeat one thing I said earlier, and that's you might want to help point your tenant in the right in certain directions and help them find help that'll help you both. And the 211 number I mentioned seems to be a good resource. Um, Somebody asked me when soccer season starts, and I know who that is, but I don't play soccer. Um, and bluntly, I don't care if soccer ever starts. I did miss the NCAA basketball tournament, absolutely, and I missed seeing the Masters. Hopefully, we'll see the Masters in November. On that light note, and otherwise somewhat grim situation, I want to thank everybody for coming and wish you all the best. Stay safe. Thank you.